Tom Pelissero. Tommy P back here on the Rich Eisen Show. How you doing, Tom?
Hey.
Tommy.
What's up, Rich? What's up to the boys in studio?
Tommy P. Happy New Year, baby.
Hey. Happy New Year, fellas.
What's
Good
up,
to
Tom?
see you all.
Tommy P.
So, Tom, let's jump in with the story of the moment in advance of Wild Card Weekend, and that is the Mendoza, quarterback of Indiana, doing what he's been doing over the last month plus, if not the entire season. What are you hearing right now amongst your colleagues and also your sources about, is this kid the first overall pick in the upcoming draft?
It's always fascinating, Rich, because my first exposure to it is always when the teams, whether through, various Bledsoe meetings, places where they share information on the following year's class. I always kind of know, all right, who's the group of guys who are being looked at as first-round picks going into the season. And if you go back, as I did recently, and look at that list going into 2025, a lot of those names that we were talking about have either fallen off because they, decided to go back to school. The Norris Sellers, obviously, went back to school. There's been other players who have not performed up to that level. The Garrett Nussmeyers have not put themselves in the conversation. But Fernando Mendoza was a really intriguing player who had just transferred into Indiana that everyone was talking about and seeing, all right, what is he going to be able to do in that program? Can Curt Cignetti do with him what he's done with others, including Curtis Rourke last year, get him playing at a really high level? They've got a really good young coaching staff around him there. And as we get toward the end of the season here, again, we're pre, Senior Bowl, we are pre Combine, Rich, the entire process, all the visits. But sitting here right now on January 2nd, it's hard for me to imagine that Fernando Mendoza is not the number one pick. This is not a really deep quarterback draft, again, for that same reason I just talked about. Some guys, Arch is not going to be coming out in this year's draft. Some of those other names that you heard here, the other ones, obviously, the Oregon quarterback has certainly been in that conversation. Ty Simpson from Alabama, if he chooses to come out, I would think would have a chance to go, certainly in the first round. The kid from Cincinnati is another one that's been talked about a little bit, but his plans are unclear at this point. There's a lot of teams that need quarterbacks right now. There's not a lot of quarterbacks to be had, which is where, if you potentially could see some horse trading up at the top here, if the Raiders end up with the number one pick, it's really hard. Again, pre this process, it's hard for me to imagine the Raiders not standing in and Fernando Mendoza heading from Bloomington to Vegas.
Yeah, and certainly a guy in Las Vegas, Nevada, who will definitely be in time for curfew. That's the sort of individual you want to have as your quarterback, certainly in a town where, things happen. Tom Pelissero here on the Rich Eisen Show. So before we get to the weekend itself, over the last 48 hours, one of the biggest or juiciest bits of news in the NFL is the Miami Dolphins apparently reaching out to Troy Aikman to help with their general manager search. What's the scoop with that?
We've seen some teams bring in consultants from different areas in recent years. A couple years ago was Bob Myers with the Commanders, who was the former Golden State Warriors executive, came from the NBA world, but had been around championship cultures, and they felt like that would help Washington as it deployed its searches for both a GM and a head coach. We've seen, for instance, Rick Spielman, who helped out with a couple of searches in recent years. He's now working for the Jets. The Troy Aikman hire is very much in the Bob Myers lens. Troy, obviously, is a Pro Football Hall of Fame quarterback with 3 Super Bowl rings, but also because of his travels with Monday Night Football and getting exposed to different people and seeing folks at games and having interactivity, he's been calling around to GMs, over the past week here and just trying to get information on, all right, if we're going to capture the winning culture, but also get the right person, who is that? He's been doing that on behalf of the Dolphins. This is not, to be clear, from my understanding, Troy, who was, mused before about, I think I could be a GM. This is not him trying to get the GM job. He's not a candidate for the GM job. I do not expect he's going to be with the Dolphins beyond this search, but he is going to sit in on the interviews here and probably ask certain types of questions that, whether it's Stephen Ross or his son-in-law, Danny Silman, who's involved, Tom Garfinkel, the president, Brandon Shore, who has a significant role in the front office as well, and Dan Marino, who's another Pro Football Hall of Fame quarterback who is still employed by the Dolphins. All those guys will be a part of this process as they vet who the right general manager is going to be. What they're looking for in Miami is a scout. They want somebody who is really going to have a vision for how do you build that roster. They got a lot of resources. They have a patient owner. From everyone I've talked to, this is a good job walking into it here. But they want someone whose expertise is in team building. And so what I would anticipate is that the Dolphins move, I think, fairly swiftly through this process. I think they're going to hit the ground running next week. They've obviously got a 2-month head start since firing Chris Greer back on Halloween. The idea of Troy Aikman is not just to allow him to be part of the interview process, but also for him to make sure, okay, it's great to say, hey, we want to pluck somebody from, let's say, San Francisco, but who's the right person to pluck from there? That's where Troy has been involved in this process. And again, I anticipate that this is going to be a process that moves on the relatively quick side, Rich.
So Norv Turner's not the next coach of Miami? Is that what you're saying?
No, but I wouldn't be surprised at all if Norv Turner is fired up on some of these things as well. I mean, think about that too. When you're bringing in somebody like Troy, he's got all these different connections to people that he was with, who in turn have connections in different buildings. So whether it's other people from, the Cowboys heyday, whether it's other just executives that Troy knows, he's going to be tapping in to all those resources here. And I think the other thing that's worth mentioning here, Rich, is we've seen a structure that's become more common in the NFL. It's not clear exactly how the structure is going to actually work in Miami, but a lot of the most successful teams in recent years have really had a GM that is focused on coaching and scouting, and then another type of administrator who is focused on all those other departments. Because in the last 10 years, there have just been these mass build-outs with whether it's your data and analytics, your nutrition, your medical staff, facilities. It's a really big job for one, the traditional GM to oversee everything. So you look at, the way that, for instance, the Rams in San Francisco, Green Bay, Detroit, they've all got somebody else who's kind of additive. That could end up being the structure here where, let's say, a Brandon Shore could oversee a lot of those other departments and allow the head scout, the GM, to focus on how do we get this team moving in the right direction with a lot of huge decisions here, Rich, looming, starting out with exactly what they're going to do at quarterback.
Yeah, let's hit that here, Tom, because the way I kind of want to handle this, because over the last 48, 72 hours, just red hot rumors that maybe Lamar doesn't want to be in Baltimore anymore. Baltimore's done with him. I'm sorry, it's tough to set you up when you take a sip from a coffee mug of you with your beautiful white dog. But, you threw me off. Lamar is gone from Baltimore because they're finally going to separate after all these years. And then Lamar comes out and it's like, what is everybody talking about? I'm not falling asleep in meetings. Everything is fine here. We all heard the Joe Burrow cryptic stuff, but he says he really likes it where he is. So I'm going to set this up with an overreaction Monday subject matter that Brockman gave me this week.
Let's go.
It's very rare that I do this. But the subject matter was a face of the franchise quarterback will be traded this offseason. What's your opinion? Is that an overreaction or it's not?
I mean, face of the franchise, I put that in the category of it's the Lamars and the Burrows and the Josh Allens of the world. Listen, in the modern NFL, we've seen some crazy stuff happen, Rich. I'm not sitting here anticipating that you get those types of moves. If we focus specifically on Lamar, there were some of those things that came out in that Baltimore Sun column that, certainly have been, circulating in the past. Is there a degree of frustration that Lamar's not around that much in the offseason? Sure. But those are voluntary workouts. He's able to make that choice. He prefers to train down there in Florida. Are there things that maybe Lamar could do differently, whether it's from a diet standpoint, off-season workouts, whatever? I mean, those are all fair discussions. I've never been told that he has fallen asleep in a meeting. I have not talked to anyone who have seen him asleep in a meeting. But I think the overarching picture here is you've got a player who is an extraordinary talent. I know Lamar, a little bit personally. I like Lamar a lot. Everybody who's around him, gets the juice from him. He's a 2-time NFL MVP, but he's been banged up. 3 of the last 4 years, he's been, really banged up with different stuff down the stretch of the season. And so what you're trying to figure out is that solely Lamar? Are there environmental factors? Are there things coaching-wise that need to change? I do not get any sense. And Rich, a lot of things can happen, right? We're going to have a lot more answers on all this after Sunday night, and then, whatever discussions occur into the week. I do not have any indication right now that John Harbaugh is in danger of being fired. That would really surprise me. There's a reason Steve Bisciotti is stuck with him for 18 seasons and running now. But clearly, there's things that they need to talk through here when you're coming off of a pretty disappointing season to this point that still could take a turn. And if they play like they did last week in Green Bay and Derrick Henry's just running all over everybody, maybe they go in the playoffs, maybe they make some noise and this all just becomes, background into the offseason. But it's no secret that they had some level of contract talks with Lamar last summer. That did not yield a deal. Dealing with Lamar, who doesn't have an agent, is always a different process. I don't know that a player who a couple of years ago, Rich, so we talked a lot about this, and why was no one willing to give up 2 first-round picks when he was franchise tagged? Why were they not willing to make that deal? The idea that a player now who's a couple of years older and has had injuries, like he has almost this entire season, is suddenly become more valuable, and people are going to be banging down their door to do a $60 million a year contract and give up major draft capital that would make you move them. That seems a tad illogical. Again, we'll see what discussions take place in the coming days. What happens on Sunday night is certainly going to be a part of that conversation. It would surprise me if Lamar Jackson is not a Baltimore Raven in 2026, but we're early here, Rich, and if you line it up on paper right now, there are maybe a dozen teams in the entire NFL that you can say, we know who their starting quarterback is going to be in 2026.
Tom Pelissero here on the Rich Eisen Show. So how many coaches are going into this weekend knowing it's their last game as the head coach of the franchise that they're currently coaching, Tom? Is it
knowing
0?
It's their last game, I would say 0.
Really?
And that is an accurate reflection. There have been other years where there's, a couple, 2 or 3 that have a pretty good idea. I don't think it's any secret to the ones that right now are in some level of doubt. Of course, you got Pete Carroll. They're 2-14. They've lost 14 of their last 15 games. He's fired 2 coordinators. It's been, just a resoundingly disappointing season on a lot of the different levels here. But Pete, as we reported a couple of weeks ago, he's been fighting to try to stay. He's 74 years old. I guarantee Pete, in his mind of always competing, does not want to have this be his last act in football. But certainly there's significant doubt surrounding his situation going into the weekend. Cleveland's another one that's been talked about a lot. They got a win last week over the Steelers. You've seen a progression of Shedeur Sanders, all the work they've put in with him in terms of the decision-making and the pocket movement, even though he throws a bad arm punt interception last week. But by and large, you've seen growth from him. They got a really good young rookie class. The stance from the front office there has been all along. They want to see the entire season through and then make decisions once they get to the end of it. So those are discussions that, are probably going to go into Monday. Atlanta, the same thing. Arthur Blank, as from my understanding, has communicated that clearly to Raheem Morris and Terry Fontenot. There's no decisions until the end of the year. If you asked me 6 weeks ago, I would say you're probably starting over in Atlanta again. But we all saw Blank celebrating on the sidelines as the Falcons are stunning the Rams last week. They've won 3 in a row. They are playing hard. They're playing hard for Raheem Morris. And so there's a lot for him to think about as well. Obviously there's other teams that have struggled down the stretch. The Cardinals have in a big way. The Colts certainly have after they were the hottest team in football the first half of the season and then just had this unbelievable mess of injuries from Daniel Jones to Charvarius Ward to, Sauce Gardner right after the big trade, DeForest Buckner having a season-ending neck surgery now as well. There's a lot more questions than there are answers, Rich. And I think that also extends to, who the candidates potentially are going to be. There's not a Ben Johnson. There's not a Mike Vrabel. There's not an Aaron Glenn. There's none of those guys who a year ago I was sitting here on this show and saying, all right, those, 2 or 3 guys, if they want jobs, they're going to get jobs in this cycle. We don't have that. Mike McCarthy is certainly in that category. A 60-something-year-old third-timer just isn't going to be for everyone. I think Mike's a really strong candidate. He's the clear one if you want to immediately reestablish core competency because he's won over 60% of his games. He's been to the playoffs 2/3 of his NFL seasons. Where that leads, is that Tennessee? Is that New York? Is that someplace else? Even the teams, I don't believe, have a great deal of clarity here. There's not going to be a situation, Rich, I would say this. There's not going to be a situation like last year where Mike Vrabel took a Jets interview the last week of the regular season, and then the Patriots pulled in a couple of other interviews to clear the decks, and they had Mike Vrabel in place 7 days after the regular season ended. I don't foresee that. I think these are going to be longer searches, and to at least some degree, I would point out that with the number of coaches that maybe have some level of uncertainty around their situations, Rich, there may be some of these owners who are waiting to see what happens in Cleveland. What happens in Baltimore? What, if anything, could happen in Pittsburgh? I don't have any indication that Mike Tomlin does not intend to return to the Steelers. I do not believe that Art Rooney is ever going to fire Mike Tomlin. But if there were a world where Mike Tomlin would become available, that potentially could be the type of thing that could change the calculus for somebody as they're deciding what to do with their own coach.
You want to take a stab at the quintessential didn't see that one coming? You want to take a stab at that?
I mean, let me say this.
I know it's speculation, and I know you deal with facts. I understand that. I don't want to put you on the spot, but it usually does happen like, wait, whoa, didn't see that one coming.
Here's what I would say. If you're looking for the teams that usually create the surprises, there are teams that either fall just short of the playoffs or get into the playoffs and have a resounding defeat. Right now, one of the most disappointing teams in all of football, certainly the most disappointing team that's still in it, I think, is Tampa. At the beginning of the year, they were the team that had all their guys out. It was, wow, Baker Mayfield's playing at an MVP level while throwing to, practice squatters out there. Now they're largely healthy, and somehow they've gotten worse. They've lost 7 of their last 8 games. They now need not just to beat the Panthers on Saturday, but get the Falcons to lose to the Saints in order to get into the playoffs. Todd Bowles signed a contract extension there last offseason. He has won the division each year that he has been there since taking over for Bruce Arians. I would just say that has the hallmarks of, if the Bucs season ends in difficult fashion, that we at minimum, there's a conversation that might be had about exactly what the future is going to look like in Tampa.
All right. In a couple minutes I have left, let's go through some injury checks for the weekend. Who are you keeping an eye on right now in your notebook, Tom?
The biggest thing is obviously Lamar, full practice week, first time in 2 months that he's practiced all 3 days in a week. He had the back issue last week. They left the door for him all the way up until game day. If it was he had rolled into Lambeau Field and said, guys, I'm good to go, they were going to put him out there with no practice. Sounds like he's in a better spot. He's going to wear some additional padding, but he's going to be good to go against the Steelers team that frankly has had his and the Ravens number for a lot of years now. TJ Watt, I know that there was some, conflicting rumors out there, but what I reported last weekend remains true, which is he's expected to be available for the game this weekend. We'll see now, coming off of a several-week layoff after getting a procedure to, fix a small hole in his lung. We'll see exactly what that means in terms of, is he playing 70 snaps this week? Is it something less than that? I wouldn't read too much into him being limited in practice on Wednesday and Thursday, because TJ Watt doesn't practice that much anyway early on in the week. But, this has been about, he has taken a very deliberate approach to coming back. Certainly the Steelers, have his best interest in mind in terms of putting him out there. But the plan all along is to have him available here in week 18. And then, there's some others, obviously, the 49ers, we'll see. George Kittle, I know, wants to give it a go on Saturday. He's officially listed as questionable. That's a pretty big one for the 49ers. Because the mismatches that he can create. And the other thing I'd point out is, Charles Cross is out for the Seahawks. That's their left tackle. For a 49ers team that Robert Saleh has done an unbelievable job this year with, his rookies and practice squad rushers. They've been rolling through there. For Sam Darnold, entering a deja vu game, if there ever was one, Rich, once again, second straight year, going on the road, with the difference between being the number 1 seed and having a bye and a home field advantage versus you lose and you're the wild card and you got to go on the road in week 1. The fact he's not going to have his blindside protector, I would not overlook that. I guarantee you Robert Saleh is not overlooking that when he's figuring out exactly how he's going to attack Sam Darnold in that Seahawks offense on Saturday.
Brother, you're one of the best. If not, you're a good friend of the program as well. Happy New Year to you, and we'll see you on Sunday.
Happy New Year to you, Rich.
Appreciate
you guys.
Tommy P,
Hey,
everybody. Tom Pelissero of the Insiders NFL Network, NFL Plus, NFL Game Day Morning right here on the show. Hey, you made it all the way to the end. Thanks for that. Check us out every single day streaming live on Disney Plus and the ESPN app 12 to 3 Eastern.